The night that changed everything began with a blizzard nobody saw coming. Not Emma Stone, the iron-fisted CEO known for her impossible standards. Not Jake Miller, the overworked single father who'd spent 3 years avoiding her critical gaze. And certainly not the weatherman who'd promised light flurries as the storm of the decade barreled toward the remote mountain conference center, where they'd be trapped together for one unforgettable night. If you've ever wondered how quickly life can change direction, stick with me until the end. I promise you won't see this coming either. If you're enjoying this journey of unexpected connection, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us how thin the line between animosity and understanding truly is. Jake checked his watch for the 5th time in 20 minutes. The presentation materials were perfectly arranged. The projector was tested, and the coffee was fresh. Still, his hands wouldn't stop trembling. 3 years working under Emma Stone, and he'd never quite mastered the art of being in her presence, without feeling like he was walking a tightrope without a net. Miller. The projection seems dim. Did you check the bulb? Emma's voice cut through the conference room as she strode in, not bothering with a greeting. Her charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, her auburn hair pulled into a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and even sharper gaze. Yes, Ms. Stone, I replaced it this morning, Jake replied, straightening his tie. At 35, he still felt like an intern around her, despite being one of the company's top financial analysts. The presentation is ready. We should wrap up with enough time to drive back before dark. Emma barely acknowledged him with a curt nod, already scrolling through emails on her phone. The client meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at this remote mountain resort, chosen specifically because the CEO of Alpine Investments loved skiing. Jake had argued against the 4-hour drive in January, but Emma had dismissed his concerns with her typical, "We go where the clients want" Miller. That's business. Now, standing in the elegant conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the increasingly heavy snowfall, Jake tried to ignore the knot of worry in his stomach. His daughter Lily was staying with his sister, but he'd promised to be back tonight for her science project. At 7 years old, Lily counted on his promises like clockwork. The client meeting began 30 minutes late and dragged on for hours. By the time they shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, the snow outside had transformed from picturesque to ominous. The resort staff had begun placing caution signs in the lobby. "Ms. Stone, I think we should consider staying the night," Jake said as they gathered their materials. "The roads." "Nonsense, Miller. I have meetings tomorrow morning that can't be rescheduled." Emma cut him off, sliding her laptop into her designer bag. The weather report said this would clear by evening. Jake bit back a frustrated sigh. With all due respect, that's not what it looks like outside. Emma finally glanced toward the windows, her expression faltering momentarily as she took in the white wall of snow. For a brief second, Jake glimpsed something unfamiliar in her eyes, uncertainty. The resort manager approached them, his expression grave. "I'm afraid the mountain pass has been closed. State police have blocked all traffic until morning at the earliest. We're preparing accommodations for stranded guests." Emma's rigid posture tightened even further. "That's unacceptable. Surely there's an alternative route." "Not in these conditions, ma'am. This storm intensified faster than predicted. We're looking at nearly 2 feet by morning." Jake watched Emma's mask of control slip ever so slightly before she composed herself. "Fine, we'll need 2 rooms then." The manager grimaced. "That's the other issue. We're nearly at capacity with the ski competition this weekend. We have exactly 1 room left." The silence that followed hung heavy between them. Jake stared at the floor, mentally calculating how many hours he'd spent alone with Emma Stone in 3 years. Meetings, presentations, the occasional elevator ride, all strictly professional, all carefully distanced. Now they were facing a night trapped together in a single room. "One room is fine," Emma finally said, her voice clipped. "I assume it has 2 beds." The manager's expression grew more uncomfortable. "It's a king suite. 1 bed, I'm afraid." Jake's stomach dropped. Lily's science project would have to wait, and now he was facing a night of awkwardness that might very well cost him his job if he said or did the wrong thing. Emma Stone was known for firing people over missed commas in emails. What would she do if he snored? "Well, take it," Emma said with finality, pulling out her corporate card. "And I expect a significant discount given the circumstances." The room was undeniably beautiful, a luxury suite with a stone fireplace, plush seating area, and enormous windows that would have showcased mountain views, if not for the wall of white outside. But all Jake could focus on was the single king-sized bed dominating the space. "I'll sleep on the sofa," he offered immediately, setting their bags down. Emma surveyed the room with clinical detachment. "Don't be ridiculous, Miller. That sofa is barely 5 feet long, and you're what, 6'1". We're adults. The bed is large enough that we can maintain appropriate boundaries." Jake blinked in surprise. It was the most personal comment Emma had ever made about him, noticing his height. In 3 years, she'd never asked about his life outside work, never acknowledged his constant juggling act as a single parent, never shown interest in anything beyond his productivity metrics. "I should call my daughter," Jake said, pulling out his phone only to find no service. The resort's Wi-Fi was still functioning, thankfully. He sent a quick message to his sister explaining the situation. "You have a daughter?" Emma asked, and Jake couldn't hide his surprise at her question. "Yes, Lily. She's 7. He hesitated before adding, "She lives with me full-time." Emma paused in unpacking her laptop. "I wasn't aware you were a single parent." The implied question hung in the air. Jake rarely discussed his personal life at work, partly because no one asked, and partly because the memory still ached. "My wife died when Lily was 2. Cancer." Emma's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I see. I'm sorry for your loss." The awkward silence that followed was broken by a knock at the door. A resort staff member had brought them a complimentary basket with toiletries, snacks, and 2 sets of basic sleepwear. Tea, shirts and flannel pants, along with information about the restaurant's extended hours for stranded guests. "Shall we get some work done before dinner?" Emma suggested, already setting up her laptop at the desk. It wasn't really a question. For 2 hours, they worked in relative silence, the howling wind outside a constant reminder of their predicament. Jake found it oddly intimate to see Emma Stone in her element, free from the distractions of the office. She was intensely focused, occasionally muttering to herself when reviewing complex data. Once, she even smiled slightly at something on her screen, a sight so rare that Jake almost commented on it before thinking better of it. At 8 p.m., they ventured to the restaurant, finding it crowded with other stranded guests. The maitre d' apologized for the wait but offered them seats at the bar until a table became available. "2 glasses of your house red," Emma told the bartender before Jake could speak. She caught his expression and added, "Unless you'd prefer something else." "No, wine is fine," Jake said, though he rarely drank. He watched as Emma took a generous sip, her shoulders lowering slightly as the tension began to ebb. "This presentation could secure Alpine's entire portfolio," she said after a moment. "The board is watching this deal closely." Jake nodded. "Your strategy was solid." Mr. Harrington seemed particularly impressed with the 5-year projection models. "Your models," Emma corrected, surprising him. "Your analysis of their market vulnerabilities was thorough." It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd ever given him. Jake took a sip of wine to hide his shock. "Thank you. I spent some late nights on those." Something flickered across Emma's face. "You work late often, with your daughter at home. Lily goes to bed at 8. I do most of my intensive work after that," Jake explained. "My sister helps out when I have early meetings or travel." Emma studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as though seeing him properly for the first time. That must be difficult. Before Jake could respond, the maitre d' informed them their table was ready. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant, with conversation flowing more easily as they shared a bottle of wine. Emma asked questions about Lily, her interests, her school, her personality, showing genuine curiosity that bewildered Jake. In return, he found himself asking about Emma's rise to becoming the youngest CEO in the company's history. "It wasn't the plan," she admitted, twirling pasta on her fork. I was supposed to be the legal counsel, not the executive. When the previous CEO, my mentor, died suddenly, the board was in crisis. I stepped in temporarily and never left. That was 5 years ago," Jake noted. "You've transformed the company. At what cost, though?" The question seemed to slip out unintentionally. Emma immediately straightened, as if catching herself being too vulnerable. "The point is, sacrifices are necessary for success." Jake considered this. "Maybe. But I've found that when I sacrifice too much for work, I'm not actually succeeding at all." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Is that a criticism of my leadership, Miller?" "No," he said carefully. "Just an observation about life. When Lily's mother died, I threw myself into work as a distraction. I nearly lost my daughter emotionally in the process of trying to provide for her." The candid admission hung between them. Emma's expression was unreadable as she took another sip of wine. "How did you course correct?" she finally asked, her voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. "I set boundaries. I became more efficient during work hours so I could be present during home hours. I learned to say no sometimes." He smiled slightly. "Not to you, obviously, but to other things." Emma actually laughed, a short, surprised sound that transformed her face. "Obviously. I'm not known for taking no for an answer." By the time they returned to their suite, the storm had intensified, rattling the windows with its fury. The temperature in the room had dropped noticeably despite the heater running at full capacity. "I'll get the fireplace going," Jake offered, grateful for something practical to do. As he arranged logs and kindling, Emma disappeared into the bathroom with her share of the complimentary sleepwear. When she emerged, Jake nearly dropped the matchbook. Emma Stone, the corporate warrior who struck fear in the hearts of executives 3 times her age, was wearing an oversized resort tee, shirt and flannel pants, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked younger, softer, and disconcertingly human. "Your turn," she said, pointedly looking away from his stare. The bathroom gave Jake a moment to collect himself. What was happening here? In one evening, he'd learned more about Emma Stone than in 3 years of working directly under her. He'd seen her laugh. He'd watched her defenses lower, if only slightly, and now they were about to share a bed, platonically, professionally, but still closer than he'd been to any woman since his wife died. When he returned to the main room, Emma was sitting cross-legged on one side of the bed, reviewing documents on her tablet. The fire cast a warm glow across the room, fighting against the chill that still lingered near the windows. "I think we should discuss sleeping arrangements," Emma said without looking up. "I don't snore, I don't move much, and I prefer the right side of the bed." Jake almost smiled at her businesslike approach. "I'm a light sleeper, but I don't snore either. Left side is fine with me." "Good." She finally glanced up. "This doesn't have to be awkward, Miller. We're both professionals." Jake nodded, though professional wasn't exactly how he'd describe their current situation. Both in borrowed pajamas, about to share a bed during a raging blizzard. He carefully sat on his designated side, maintaining a respectful distance. "You can call me Jake, you know," he said after a moment, considering the circumstances. Emma looked at him with mild surprise. "I call everyone by their last name. It maintains appropriate distance." "We're sharing a bed, Miss Stone. I think we're past appropriate distance." To his astonishment, she smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Fair point. Jake." His name and her voice sounded strange, almost intimate. To distract himself, Jake checked his phone, relieved to see his sister had responded to his message. "Lily's science project is going well. They're making a model of the solar system." Emma set her tablet aside. "What's her favorite subject?" "Science, definitely. She wants to be an astronaut, or a veterinarian, or sometimes both. She plans to be the first person to treat sick animals in space." Emma laughed, the sound warming the room more effectively than the fireplace. "Ambitious. She takes after her father." "Me. I'm not ambitious," Jake protested. "I just work hard." "You've risen through 3 levels in 3 years," Emma pointed out. "Most analysts take twice as long to accomplish what you have." Jake was startled by her awareness of his career progression. "I didn't realize you'd noticed." "I notice everything, Miller." "Jake," she corrected herself. "It's my job to know who's valuable." The conversation drifted to work matters, then to books they'd both read, then somehow to childhood memories. Jake found himself sharing stories about Lily that he rarely told anyone, and Emma revealed snippets of her life before becoming the Stone, as employees secretly called her. How she'd wanted to be a pianist before practical concerns led her to business school. How she still played sometimes when no one was around. The hours passed, the fire burned low, and the storm continued its assault outside. When Emma finally yawned around midnight, they both acknowledged it was time to sleep. They settled under the covers with a careful gap between them, both lying stiffly on their backs. "Good night, Jake," Emma said, her voice already heavy with approaching sleep. "Good night, Emma," he replied, testing her first name cautiously. She didn't object. In the darkness, Jake lay awake, listening to the storm and Emma's increasingly even breathing. How strange that this woman he'd feared for years could suddenly seem so human, so approachable. He wondered what tomorrow would bring. If this newfound understanding would survive daylight and the return to their normal professional roles. He must have eventually fallen asleep, because he woke suddenly in darkness to the sound of whimpering. Disoriented, he turned to find Emma caught in what appeared to be a nightmare, her face contorted in distress. "Emma," he whispered, gently touching her shoulder. "Emma, wake up. You're dreaming." She startled awake, eyes wide and confused, automatically gripping his arm. For a moment, genuine fear showed on her face before recognition dawned. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, releasing him and sitting up. "Did I wake you?" "It's okay," Jake assured her. "Bad dream." Emma pushed her hair back from her face, visibly collecting herself. "Just stress, probably. The Alpine deal is significant." Jake could tell she was lying but didn't push. "Can I get you some water?" She nodded, and he padded to the bathroom, returning with a glass. Emma took it with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you," she said after drinking half the water. "I don't usually. This doesn't happen often." Jake settled back on his side of the bed. "You don't have to explain. We all have our demons." Emma was quiet for so long that Jake thought she might have fallen back asleep. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "It was the same dream I always have. I'm back in that boardroom, the day they told me Richard had died. 30 people looking at me, expecting me to fall apart, waiting for the young female protege to cry or run away so they could take control." Jake remained silent, understanding instinctively that interrupting would break whatever spell had made Emma willing to share this. "I didn't give them the satisfaction," she continued. "I stood up, called the meeting to order. and presented a transition plan I'd created in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, when I already knew Richard wouldn't make it, but no one else did yet. "That's incredible," Jake said quietly. "It's pathological," Emma corrected. "I've been running that company on pure determination and fear ever since. Fear that if I show any weakness, they'll take it all away." Jake turned to face her in the dim light from the dying fire. "Is that why you're so hard on everyone? Because you're afraid of showing weakness in anyone else?" The question would have been impertinent. But something had shifted between them, creating a space where honesty felt possible. "Yes," Emma admitted, "and because excellence is the only defense against failure." "But at what cost?" Jake echoed her earlier question. "You asked me how I corrected after losing myself in work. Maybe the better question is, why did I need to?" Emma studied him in the firelight. "Tell me." "Because perfection isn't sustainable. Neither is fear. They burn you out, make you miss the moments that actually matter." Jake thought of Lily's face when he missed her kindergarten graduation because of a quarterly report. Success that costs you everything else isn't success at all. "So what's your alternative?" Emma asked, but there was no challenge in her voice, only genuine curiosity. "Balance, boundaries, being human and allowing others to be human too." He smiled slightly. "Forgiveness, both for yourself and others." Emma was quiet again, processing his words. When she spoke, her voice had lost its customary sharpness. "I don't know how to be any other way anymore." "Yes, you do," Jake said gently. "You're doing it right now." Something shifted in Emma's expression, a realization, perhaps, or surrender. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she slowly reached out and took his hand in the darkness, a gesture so unexpected that Jake nearly pulled away in surprise. Her palm was warm against his, her grip tentative at first, then more certain. They stayed like that, hands clasped between them on the bed, neither speaking nor needing to. Eventually, Emma's breathing deepened again as she drifted back to sleep, her fingers still intertwined with his. Jake watched her face in the fading firelight, marveling at how peaceful she looked in sleep, how different from the intimidating CEO who struck fear in the office. When he woke again, pale morning light was filtering through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving an unblemished blue sky and a landscape transformed by several feet of snow. Jake became aware of a weight against his side, and looked down to find Emma's head resting on his shoulder, her body curved toward his, their hands still